Hey guys, it's CJ. Today we're going to be taking a look at part 2 of my Tesla price model through 2030. If you didn't see part 1, in part 1 we went over how much the automotive alone might be worth, the automotive side of Tesla. And a quick recap, we settled on about $1,200 a share, potentially by the end of 2022, $3,000 by the end of 2025, and $5,000 by the end of 2030. Today we're going to be looking at the Robotaxi side. In part 3, we're going to look at the energy side, and then I'll probably put together a cumulative model where we can add everything together and look at different variables there. Okay, so the first thing we wanted to look at for the Robotaxi model is the fleet size. We figured out in the automotive side of this model that we think Tesla could probably easily produce 20 million cars a year by the end of 2030. That's Elon's own goal, and I think it's reasonable. So these orange bars here are the cumulative amounts of that. So that's when you add every year together. So that means all the cars they've produced that have the hardware and software to do self-driving. By the time 2030 gets here, for example, they'd have 88 million cars in the fleet. The Robotaxi launch year, that's up for debate. Some people think it could launch as early as 2022 in limited locations. That's not terribly unrealistic. Others, Elon time could be 2023. I'm going to be a little more conservative and say 2024. This will vastly affect the stock price because the profitability is exponential. So the sooner they start, the better in terms of profitability. But I'm going to be conservative there. Where I'm being bullish is that they do this at all, because a lot of people think this will never happen. So the bullish part of the scenario is that it happens and they create robotaxis. And if you're here and you're not exactly sure what robotaxis are, it's just the idea that you have cars like Uber or Lyft that drive themselves. So you save money in terms of maintenance, you save money in terms of fuel, and you save money in terms of the driver, which means massive profits. So basically, if you own a Tesla that has full self-driving enabled, then you might be able to put your car in the fleet, have it drive around all day while you're at work, and make you money and make Tesla money. Okay, so we decided 2024 would be a conservative launch year. And then I'm going to be conservative as well and say that only 1% of the fleet is utilized as robotaxis on the launch year. So that'll be right here. There'll be only 110,000 robotaxis, which seems pretty realistic. I don't know where all they would launch. I imagine major cities would ramp up over a year. There could be, let's say you had a 2023 launch and they only launch in like 1 or 2 cities, get their feet wet. It's not even worth counting. And then a few months later, I think you would start to see more of a ramp up. They may bring 10,000 robotaxis into a major city. And then by the end of the year, perhaps they're in like 8 or 9 or 10 cities. And then I have a growth rate on that of 71%, which sounds like a lot, but remember, you're starting at 1%. So that means that if you have, in 2025, you have 18 million cars in the fleet grew, and the rate of people getting involved in robotaxis grew as well. So you end up with 300,000 cars being utilized. And this would be globally. By year 2, they could be introduced, more in China, Canada, potentially Europe, depending on regulations and so on, right? And then it just scales up until I have it at 22 million cars in 2030, which would be roughly 1 in 4. Okay, that may sound like a lot, but when I say 1 in 4 cars, I mean that utilize their vehicle as a robotaxi in some regard. So some people are going to have put 1,000 miles, robotaxi miles on their car. Maybe they just run it once a month. Okay. And others will put 120,000 a year, 120,000 miles a year on their car. So I'm saying that 25% of people will be involved in some way in robotaxis. I'm also not assuming that that Tesla creates its own fleet of cars, which could potentially be much more valuable if they just run their own cars and they stop selling cars to people. But at the same time, that's a very big endeavor, trying to take care of all those vehicles and then scale worldwide. So I'm not really sure. A lot of people think that's going to happen. So I'm conservative there as well. I'm saying this is just people that own Teslas and they're getting involved, and that about 1 in 4 will use this robotaxi network in order to make extra money. It all seems very low to me. It's free money, but I'm trying to be conservative. And let's go down and look at the next thing. Okay. So the next thing I want to look at are the amount of miles that would mean. We already figured out this 1% of the fleet in 2024 and the growth rate, and where we would end up in 2030, 25% of the people participating in this in some regard. And also keep in mind that you may be thinking, well, 25% of the people may not buy full self-driving. I think Tesla will fix that. I think they will figure out a way either to get massive amount of people with full self-driving, or they may make it an option, for instance, where if you don't have full self-driving, that's okay. Maybe you can't use full self-driving for personal use, but you'll still be able to put it in the network as a robotaxi. Maybe Tesla just takes a bigger cut because you don't have full self-driving or something. They'll figure out a way to get everyone involved. I have a feeling. Okay, so the next thing I want to figure out is how many miles on average will people be driving? Okay, because the way I'm doing this, like I said, so some people will be driving 10 or they won't be driving. Some robotaxis will be utilized at, say, 10,000 miles a year or 1,000 miles a year, and other people are going to run theirs 100,000 miles a year. So I'm settling on an average. So what I've said is that the average billable miles per car, that means the miles where a person's actually in it, where you're getting revenue. Because when it's going around to drive to pick people up, right, you're not making any money. The average billable miles would be about 45,000. And the utilization rate, which is the amount of time a person is in the vehicle being charged for this service, is 70%. So that means 64,000 miles is how much the car will drive. But you're only able to charge 45,000 miles to a customer because there's only a customer in it 70% of the time. I hope that was clear as mud. Okay, in that instance, we can see the miles, billable miles right here. We end up at around 1 trillion miles by 2030 in this pretty conservative model. Clearly, it could end up being a great deal more. We could end up where 1 in 4 people are actually running these at 100,000 miles, and you get something way up here, 1.5 trillion miles or something like that. But we're going to just stay with this conservative model and say we're at almost 1 trillion miles driven in terms of billable miles. Okay. And what I've done over here is figure out the price versus demand. And basically, I just stole this from ARK Invest because they put out something very similar to this. And they did it with a lot of research that I don't have time to do. And all I did was make their numbers rounder. So they had numbers like, $3.28 or something. And they didn't have as many of these. So I just made it a little more specific and rounded them out so it was a little easier to see. So what this means is that basically that there is demand for, 1 billion miles. And let's call this basically in the United States at $4 a mile. And that's probably true. There are a lot of miles. You can go to New York and try to get an Uber and you're probably paying, $5 or $6 a mile, especially if you include tip and all that stuff. So easily people will pay this much. In order to increase demand, you have to lower the price. Okay. So what that means is, let's say, look at 2025, there's 14 billion billable miles. And what that means is Tesla can probably charge between $2.75 and $3 a mile, and the supply will meet demand, and they'll be able to keep that up. Once you get to 2027 and you're trying to drive 85 billion miles, you're going to have to be closer to $2 a mile to have enough demand. By the time you get up here to 2030 and you have almost a trillion miles, you're going to be getting close to needing to have your price down to like $1, and so on and so forth, right? So that's the idea here, and that's built into the profit later. I'm assuming that the prices drop as these miles go up. Okay, next thing we'll look at is profit. Okay, and this profit is based on what we just talked about in terms of how much we'll charge per mile, and then also the profit margin, right? So I'm saying Tesla is going to charge a platform fee of probably, I'm actually thinking 30%. Let me move that to, I think 30% is pretty fair. So you would get 70% of your Robotaxi's revenue, and then Tesla would get 30%. And the profit margin, I'm going to estimate, since it's essentially software for Tesla, that it's 85%. It could be as high as 90%. Okay. And the way this is computed is, again, it's based on what I showed you up here, the miles that they drove and the price that they would be able to get. So even though as time goes on, they have to charge less, the amount of Teslas in the fleet keeps growing. So they keep making more. So you can see the profit right here. So 2024 would be 3 billion, and then you're 8 billion, 18, 39, 73. And then by the time you get to 2030, you're at $226 billion in profit. And this is after taxes, right? And I think currently it's more like 25%. So you'd be at 235 billion in profit. But I'm going to assume it's going up. And this doesn't include other expenses. This is basically back of the napkin stuff. So this doesn't have SG&A, operating expenses and that stuff in it. But still, you're looking at a whole lot of profit in what seems like a pretty conservative view, in my opinion. Again, if they pull it off in the first place. The bullish part is that they're able to get these cars driving themselves in a material way by 2024. Okay, so, and then lastly, I think it's lastly, yeah, now we can look at what that would mean to the stock price. Assuming everything we talked about, and what I'm doing here, just like I did in the automotive side, I'm assuming that the PE ratio or the multiple will be higher in the first year, right? Because when you see this amount of massive growth in front of you, you're going to have a much higher price to earnings ratio. So in other words, you're willing to pay a lot more for the stock, even though it's not producing earnings in the beginning, if you believe the future growth is really high. So we have the P ratio. I have it set to, 90. You can see it different ratios. It's going to make a material difference, earlier on. So it's really hard to guess. But I'm going to say 90 is absolutely fair. And then I'm going to say the PE ratio in 2030, even though it looks like there would be a lot of growth ahead of it, is down to 35, which is pretty, certainly not bullish for a software platform like this. So what does that tell us? That tells us that if they launch in 2024, then by the end of 2025, that robotaxis would have a value of about $500 a share added to the value of automotive. It could very well be that if this is obvious, if what's happening in 2025 is obvious and everyone sees it, this PE ratio could shoot up dramatically, like crazy, like way up here at 250 or something, really crazy. Okay, so you could end up with a very high PE ratio, where it could add $1,200 a share to the price. This is in addition to the price of the automotive and the energy side. I've been conservative on everything here, so I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to lower it down. Let's say it's something like, 90, maybe 95. Okay, so that would give you a PE ratio of 95, which would mean in 2025, your PE ratio would be down to 85, and it would add about $500 a share in 2025. But look how fast it grows due to the profitability of robotaxis. $1,000 a share, 2026, 2,000, 2027, 3,000, 2028. Remember, this is in addition to the automotive side. And then you're up to $6,000 a share in 2030. Again, automotive side, we were at 5,000. 5,000 plus 6,000, that's $11,000 a share in 2030. And we have not done energy yet. I haven't even modeled it yet, just the most rudimentary parts. So this is pretty encouraging. If you think robotaxis might happen, this is a pretty big deal. I don't feel like I'm putting out crazy numbers at all. And you can see that this really isn't the bull case, by any means. They could launch earlier. They could launch in 2022. So instead of everything conservative, let me make everything a little optimistic and I'll show you. So you could launch in 2022. Boom. Look, you're up to 14,000 a share in 2030. They could charge 35% for their platform fee, or say just 33. That's kind of realistic. You're over 15,000. Instead of the cars averaging 65,000 miles of that group, maybe it's 100,000. I mean, now you're at almost 18,000 a share. It gets really crazy, right? So, but we're going to put it back. We're going to stay conservative. We're going to say 30% platform fee. We're going to say this is more like, 45,000 billable miles. And we still end up with a pretty bullish run of basically a 10x from here over the next several years, up to 6,000 a share by the end of 2030. Again, remember, auto was 5,000. 5,000 plus 6,000, that's 11,000 a share in 2030. Potentially, it does not count energy. It does not count energy. We haven't looked at energy yet. So this is going to go higher. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. If it was, you might want to subscribe so you can get the notification for part 3 on the energy side. And that's it. Thanks, guys.